نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم أما بعد بسم الله. Today, inshallah, we will start Surah Fussilat. Surah Fussilat is a Makki surah, surah number 41, 54 ayats and 6 rukus. And the name Fussilat comes from second verse where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions how this book has been explained in detail. So Fussilat means detailed. Another name of the surah is Hamim Sajda. And what is the connection of this surah with the previous surah? So Surah Ghafir and Surah Fussilat both begin with a description of Quran. And then both surahs reprimand polytheists, mushrikeen of Makkah, who argued about the verses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Here's a brief synopsis of the surah. So the surah begins with the declaration of Quran as a divine book from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It proves the sincerity of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam in sharing the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and mentions the reluctance of mushrikeen in accepting this divine message. The surah reassures believers of the rewards earned due to righteous deeds and denounces disbelievers and warns them against punishment that was given to Ad and Samud in the past. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala confirms that body parts of a person on the Day of Judgment will bear witness against him. And finally, towards the end, the surah declares Quran as a book of guidance and healing. So let's begin the surah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم Hamim. So the word Hamim is one of the huruf al-muqatta'at in the Quran, and this surah is among the 7 surahs that begin with the word Hamim, and all these surahs combined are called Hawamim. Tanzilum min ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. This is a revelation from the entirely merciful, the especially merciful, meaning the Quran is revealed from the most gracious, the most merciful, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. كتاب فصلت آياته قرآنا عربيا لقوم يعلمون بشيرا ونذيرا فأعرض أكثرهم فهم لا يسمعون. A book whose verses have been detailed, an Arabic Quran for a people who know, as a giver of good tidings and a warner, but most of them turn away, so they do not hear. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses Quraysh in particular in these verses that they should not have any difficulty in understanding Quran since it was revealed in their language. And in these verses there are 3 qualities of Quran that are mentioned. The first one being Fussilat, meaning explained clearly in detail. That is, the meanings of Quran are clear and its rulings are sound and wise. Quran has described various topics like rulings of Sharia, stories of past nations, false beliefs, and their refutation, etc. across multiple surahs and with examples, and hence Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has explained many concepts, many of his rulings in detail in this book. The second and third qualities mentioned are Bashiran wa Nadhira, that is, Quran communicates glad tidings of happiness to believers and gives warning of perpetual punishment to disbelievers. Then لِقَوْمِ يَعْلَمُونَ, for people of understanding, which means that verses of Quran will only benefit those who ponder over it and try to understand the message. However, Arabs and Quraysh at that time had turned away from Quran and they acted as if they did not even hear it. There is a background to the revelation of this surah. When key figures of Quraysh accepted Islam, like Umar anhu and Hamza anhu, it made Quraysh wonder how to block further spreading of Islam. They had tried to intimidate believers without much luck. So this time they decided to instead persuade Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam to give up the call to Islam and entice him through either wealth or woman or status, and perhaps he could prefer whatever he wished among these things and stop calling people towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it comes in a few narrations that Utbah bin Rabi'a, who was one of the recognized leaders of Quraysh, went to Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam while Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was sitting in Masjid al-Haram. And he offered Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam wealth. And then he proposed that Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam could become the leader of the whole Quraysh. And if he wanted to be a king, they would take him as a king. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam listened calmly to this offer. And when Utbah finished his speech, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam asked him to listen to what he has to say in response. And then Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam started reciting Surah Fussilat until he reached the verse of Sajda. So there is a verse of prostration in this surah. And at that point, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam performed the sajda and said to Utbah, "You have heard what you have heard, and you're now free to do what you like." So Utbah got up and went back to Quraysh. And they could see that something changed in Utbah. The color of his face had changed. And then Utbah said something which is worth listening to. He said, "Inni قد سمعت قولا والله ما سمعت مثله قط والله ما هو بالسحر ولا بالشعر ولا بالكهانة يا معشر قريش أطيعوني واجعلوها لي خلوا بين الرجل وبين ما هو فيه فاعتزلوه فوالله لا يكونن لقوله الذي سمعت نبأ فإن تصبه العرب فقد كفيتموه بغيركم وإن يظهر على العرب فملكه ملككم وعزه عزكم وكنتم أسد الناس به." So he said, "I heard such a discourse that by God I have never heard any discourse like it before. By God, it is neither sorcerer's enchantment, nor a poet's poetry, nor a wizard's incantation," meaning it is not something that they have obtained from shaitan. "O my tribes of Quraysh, listen to me and let me handle this matter. My advice is that you should give up confronting him and let him go about his business because this discourse is bound to receive eminence. You should wait and see how the rest of the Arab treats him. If besides Quraysh, the rest of the Arabs defeat him, then your problem is solved without any effort on your part. And if he prevails, meaning if Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam prevails on the rest of the Arabs, then his rule will be your rule, his honor will be your honor, and you will be the luckiest people because of him." So this was his advice back to Quraysh. He really was impressed with the eloquence of Quran, with the verses of Quran, the verses of this surah. And then he changed his opinion. So he went to Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam to convince him. Instead, he came back being convinced himself that he was on the right path. When Quraysh heard his speech, they said, "O Abu Walid, Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam has cast a spell upon you with his words." And then Utbah said, "Look, I have given you my advice, so it's up to you what you do with it." So this was the incident that led to the revelation of the first part of the surah, Hamim. And in short, the attempt of Quraysh to entice Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam failed. And in response, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed Surah Fussilat, which Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam recited back to him. وَقَالُوا قُلُوبُنَا فِي أَكِنَّةٍ مِّمَّا تَدْعُونَا إِلَيْهِ وَفِي آذَانِنَا وَقْرٌ وَمِن بَيْنِنَا وَبَيْنِكَ حِجَابٌ فَاعْمَلْ إِنَّنَا عَامِلُونَ. And they say, "Our hearts are within coverings from that to which you invite us, and in our ears is deafness, and between us and you is a partition, so work, indeed we are working." So the word akinna means أغطية مانعة تمنع الفهم, covering that prevents comprehension. And another word in this verse, وقر, means صمم وثقل يمنع السمع, meaning deafness and heaviness that prevents hearing. And another word, hijab, means ستر غليظ يمنع التواصل, a thick veil that prevents communication. So this verse describes the attitude of Quraysh, that even though they heard Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, they acted like their hearts were covered and their ears do not understand. And they said to Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, look, we're doing our thing and you do your thing. So, don't bother us with your message. Let's review ayats 1 to 5. So Quran is a divine revelation in Arabic language that clearly describes its verses. Quran gives glad tidings to believers and warns disbelievers of punishment. And disbelievers blatantly and shamelessly ignore the true guidance which comes to them. قل إنما أنا بشر مثلكم يوحى إلي أنما إلهكم إله واحد فاستقيموا إليه واستغفروه وويل للمشركين. Say, O Muhammad, I am only a man like you, to whom it has been revealed that your God is but one God. So take a straight course to him and seek his forgiveness, and woe to those who associate others with Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam to respond to mushrikeen in a humble way, that he is just a human like them, except that he receives divine revelation. And he is himself not claiming to be an idol or God like Quraysh assumed for so many other figures of the past. Instead, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam is calling them towards the true guidance, that there is only one God who should be asked for forgiveness, and anyone who associates partners with that God will be destroyed. الَّذِينَ لَا يُؤْتُونَ الزَّكَاةَ وَهُمْ بِالْآخِرَةِ هُمْ كَافِرُونَ. Those who do not give zakah, and in the hereafter they are disbelievers, meaning they do not believe in the hereafter. This verse describes two characteristics of mushrikeen. One, that they do not pay zakah, and two, that they do not believe in resurrection. So with regards to the mention of zakah, a question comes to mind. This surah is a Makki surah, and zakat was made obligatory in Medina. So how can this verse mention zakah when the order of zakah was not even revealed at that time? So there are two explanations given by scholars. Some scholars say that the order of zakat had already been established earlier, but the details of zakat, meaning the nisab, came after migration to Medina. So they give the proof from a verse in Surah An'am, ayat number 141, كُلُوا مِن ثَمَرِهِ إِذَا أَثْمَرَ وَآتُوا حَقَّهُ يَوْمَ حَصَادِهِ وَلَا تُسْرِفُوا إِنَّهُ لَا يُحِبُّ الْمُسْرِفِينَ. Eat of each of its fruits when it yields, and give its due, meaning zakah, on the day of its harvest, and be not excessive. So this verse from Surah An'am is mentioning giving due from the harvest, which is a form of zakah. So this they take as a proof that the order of zakah was already in place, but the details came later. So in Medina is when the calculations of zakat, meaning nisab and other details, were revealed. So that is the first explanation of how the zakah is mentioned here, because it was already revealed as an order. The second explanation is where scholars take the word zakah in its literal meaning, which means to purify. So when you give zakah on wealth, you're purifying that wealth. So similarly here, in this context, the verse would indicate that mushrikeen did not purify their soul of bad qualities, including the worst of them, which is shirk. And this usage is similar to what comes in a few different places in Quran. So in Surah A'la, ayat number 14, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ تَزَكَّى. He has certainly succeeded who purifies himself. And then in Surah Shams, ayat number 9 and 10, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا. He has succeeded who purifies it, meaning the soul, and he has failed who suppresses it. So these scholars look at other verses of the Quran and they are able to find usage of the word zakah in this literal sense of purification, and hence in this context, then even though this surah was revealed in Mecca, here the mention of zakah is that the mushrikeen do not purify themselves of their incorrect understanding of associating partner with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah knows best. إِنَّ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ لَهُمْ أَجْرٌ غَيْرُ مَمْنُونٍ. Indeed, those who believe and do righteous deed, for them is a reward uninterrupted. So the word mamnoon means something that is interrupted, and غَيْرُ مَمْنُون, as it comes in this verse, means uninterrupted. So scholars explain this verse in two different ways. First interpretation would be that believers will get a reward which is continuous and eternal. So it will not be interrupted. That's the first explanation. The second interpretation is in the context of a person who performs good deeds regularly, but then he gets sick, or he goes on a journey, or some other hardship comes along his way, and he's not able to perform his regular actions, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will, through his mercy, even in that situation, give this person full reward. This interpretation is also supported by a narration narrated by Abu Musa al-Ash'ari in Bukhari. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, إِذَا مَرِضَ الْعَبْدُ أَوْ سَافَرَ كُتِبَ لَهُ مِثْلُ مَا كَانَ يَعْمَلُ مُقِيمًا صَحِيحًا. When a person falls ill or travels, then he will get rewards similar to that he gets for good deeds practiced at home when in good health. So that is the second interpretation. Let's quickly review the summary of verses 6 to 8. One should strive to remain on straight path and seek forgiveness for any mistakes. Disbelievers reject the hereafter and fail to purify their souls by accepting the true faith and not associating partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And believers will receive never-ending reward for their good deeds. So we'll stop here inshallah. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم.